Hey everyone, it's the early afternoon on Christmas Eve, and that means that we are fast approaching a very interesting and lovely time of the year. In the English-speaking world, it's always called the 12 days of Christmas, but where I'm from, the nights are in fact much more interesting and much more significant this time of year. Because while it is, on the one hand, a very peaceful, quiet time and a time for reflection, a time for cleaning and cleansing, it is also, on the other hand, a time when the veil between the worlds is very thin and spirits and demons abound and spirits and demons are running wild, and of course they do so mainly at night. So I thought that these 12 nights are the best time to read the 12 stories in this short story anthology called The Winter Spirits. It contains ghostly tales for frosty nights by exactly 12 authors. They are Kieran Millwood Hargrave, Laura Shepard Robinson, Andrew Michael Hurley, Imogen Hermes Gower, Natasha Pulley, Elizabeth McNeil, Bridget Collins, Stuart Turton, Jess Kidd, Katrina Ward, Susan Stokes Chapman, and Laura Purcell. Now, to be perfectly honest, I already know that I am not even going to try and read some of the stories, a couple of stories in this collection, but I thought it would nevertheless be a nice project to vlog these 12 nights and go through this book and tell you about the stories that I'm reading, just a couple of keywords for each story so as not to spoil them, of course, but it would make for a nice and cozy 12 nights reading vlog. I'm also planning on reading quite a few other books in this span of 12 nights, almost a fortnight. I have a goal to meet for the end of the year, and I also kind of want to salvage my reading year and, of course, start the new year right. I'm not sure how much of what else I'm reading I'm going to vlog in this vlog, but who knows, I'm going to update you whenever I feel like I have something to say about what I'm reading and when the lighting situation isn't too bad. You're also going to get a couple of life updates because I am on a 2-week break from work and I have a number of very different plans for these 14 days, and some of them might turn out to be very picturesque. Hi guys, it's already Friday, so quite a few days have already passed and I haven't given you an update. I just was very busy in the last couple of days. On Wednesday, day before tomorrow, I went to Salzburg, the town in Austria, Mozart's town in Austria. And it was so, so lovely. It's such a pretty old town, and the sun was out, the sun was shining, blue skies all day long, and the Christmas market was still open and not overcrowded at this time of year. And everything was so, so pretty, and it was just so good to be out and about for a full day, or at least until the early afternoon, and with the sun shining all the time. We've had very little sun here recently since Snowmageddon, and it made me feel really alive and so good in my body. It was exhausting for me because I haven't moved for such a long time without a break since my injury in September. So it was exhausting and my muscles are pretty sore today, but it was so, so worth it. You will already have seen the clips from this trip earlier, so I will just let the pictures speak for themselves. And then yesterday I went to Zugspitze, Germany's highest mountain. And of course, I didn't walk up in the snow with an injury. I took the train up and then the cable car down, but it was still pretty exhausting, and I was up and on my feet all day long as well, and it was pretty cold on the summit. So I've had quite an exhausting couple of days, but I still got quite a lot of reading done because of all the train journeys. On the train to and from Salzburg, I read How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. I mistakenly thought that this was the inspiration for and the book behind Miyazaki's newest movie, the newest Studio Ghibli animation movie called The Boy and the Heron in English. In Japanese, this is actually the Japanese title of the movie, and Miyazaki said that this was his favorite book growing up. But it turns out that the title of the movie is more or less just a nod to the book, a sort of dedication of the movie to the book and to the author by Miyazaki, who was apparently so touched by the book and so deeply impressed by the messages herein. And the book turned out to be very different from what I expected. It isn't actually really a story. It is more like a collection of life lessons, which I think are pretty valuable if you are at the age of the young boys in the center of the book, who are, I'm not sure, around 14, 15, I would say. I'm pretty sure that this is a hard-hitting book when you are of that age. But for me, it wasn't quite such a mind-blowing collection of lessons at my own age. However, I'm glad I read this. It's been a bucket list book for quite some time now, and I'm glad I got it out of the way. And on the way to Zugspitze yesterday, I read a short story novelette by Victoria Goddard, who wrote The Hands of the Emperor. And this is actually set in the same world. It's called The Tower at the Edge of the World, and it turned out to be a very fitting read for this trip yesterday. However, I didn't like it in the end because it's not a story. It pretends to be a story, but it isn't one. There are two mysteries at the heart of this story that a young man encounters who lives in a tower at the edge of the world, and he is all alone, and his only and important task is to perform rituals for the emperor, and so that the emperor, his life and his rule will continue and thrive. And the young man never questioned anything about his position, his place in the world, the power and importance of the rituals that he is doing, and about anything in the magical way that his life in the tower is organized, until one day he sees a shiny object outside of his window and everything changes. And as I said, there are two big mysteries, and neither of them gets dissolved in a satisfying way. They just are dissolved, one by magic and the other one, I don't even know how the resolution came about, and it's really unsatisfying. And it has all the makings of a classic yarn. And then it just drops the ball at the end and it just ends, and you are supposed to be satisfied with the ending and looking forward to hearing more from this man too, because he goes on to have other adventures in this world. And I'm just so incredibly not interested in hearing more from him if that is the way he goes about solving problems. In addition, I have already read one tale from this author before, which incidentally I think is even one of the adventures that the young man from this story goes on to have. And I abandoned it about halfway through because I was so exasperated by the fact that Victoria Goddard, I think, self-publishes her books and definitely has never spoken to an editor or somebody who can help her make her books tighter. I'm sure she doesn't want to, because she supposedly has an artistic vision that she doesn't want to have corrupted by an editor, but that's just bollocks. Everyone can benefit from an editor, and in her case, it's pretty obvious, I would say, that she could have benefited from one. But now to the star of this vlog, the 12-night book, The Winter Spirits. I started it, and I started by reading Natasha Pulley's story, The Sword Miracles. I was most looking forward to reading her story anyway. She's definitely my favorite author from the authors in this anthology. And I was curious because this is her first original short story, I think. Her short story in the Haunting Season, the anthology that came out 2 years ago, I think, was actually a spin-off or a sequel short story to The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. And The Sword Miracles is her first original story. And I was really enjoying it, really loving it. It was so incredibly atmospheric, and it had a very original setting on the island of St. Hilda, which is more or less in the same place as St. Kilda, the actual Scottish island, and there are gannets on St. Hilda too, so it's pretty much a stand-in for St. Kilda. And it was so atmospheric and such a great puzzle. But I was a bit let down at the end, because I thought that the story would have been better if we hadn't gotten an explanation for everything, expressis verbis out of the mouth of the originator of this book. That was a bit cringy, I think, and it seemed a bit amateurish. I would have preferred it if she had made it clear what happened in a somewhat more subtle way. Still, I totally loved the atmosphere, and it was just a nice reading experience. I'm going to report back once I've read a couple more stories from this collection. I don't know when that will be, because I have big plans for the weekend, and I'm trying to squeeze in another book before midnight on the 31st or the 1st of January. And I will have to squeeze it in on Saturday and Sunday, because tonight is another big night. I'm going to the ballet again. If you're wondering how I can afford going to the ballet all the time and how I got rich all of a sudden, I didn't. I just buy the cheap standing room spots all the time. So tonight is a big story ballet. It's Cinderella. It's 2.5 hours, including breaks, and it cost 12 euros, the ticket. So you see, you absolutely don't have to be rich in order to go to the ballet all the time. I'm going to leave you with a few impressions from my trip to the summit of Zugspitze. It's going to be worth it. It was incredible. Snowy mountains for days, one of my favorite sights in the whole world. And I'm going to try and squeeze in some pictures from the ballet, from the theater, and maybe from the curtain call later on too. Bye for now. I'll talk to you again in a couple of days. It's already the afternoon on New Year's Eve on Sunday, and I'm pretty knackered. I haven't gotten much exercise in the last few months due to my injury, and now suddenly I'm going on all these trips and running around all the time and cycling a lot all the time and going places for mini hikes, etc. Like yesterday, I went to this small hill in an urban wood close to me from where you have a spectacular view of the Alps. And it was absolutely lovely, but all in all, I went to this little free library on the way there, or not really on the way there. I took quite the detour to get to the little free library, and then I did some shopping on the way home, and all in all, it took 3 hours before I was home again, and that is quite a long outing for me these days. And never mind the Salzburg trip, where I was on my feet for 5 hours. So now I'm really looking forward to 2 lazy days at home with lots of reading and only small walks around the neighborhood. I did get a lot of reading done these last few days again. And one major update that I wanted to give you is that I finished a book that I had been reading for a few weeks now. I took my time with it because it was so lovely. It was In the Forests of Serre by Patricia McKillip. Of the 5 novels that I've read by McKillip, this is the one that is most McKillip, so to speak. It is also the one that draws most heavily on really well-known fairy tale and folk tale material, namely the Russian folk tales of Baba Yaga and the Firebird. So I presume that in order to make this story really her own, McKillip had to lean very heavily into her own very idiosyncratic style. Her style is very dreamy, very associative. Like every other sentence takes a turn that you wouldn't expect, but it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel unnaturally and inauthentically quirky. It never feels like she is trying too hard, that she is only wearing this idiosyncrasy as a mask. It just feels very genuinely the way that she thinks and writes. And so even though the material, the folktale material is of course very ancient, and also the fantasy material that she combines it with, the fantasy elements and tropes, are very old stock high fantasy material. There's wizards, there's princes and princesses, there is a nameless evil that needs to be defeated. All these are very well-known fantasy stock elements, and yet still this story feels very fresh and very new due to her McKillip's very own unique style. I really loved reading this and can't wait to read more by her. Unfortunately, the book by hers that I most want to read is the Book of Edric's Wolf, and I have ordered this. I ordered this already more than 3 weeks ago now through my local bookshop, but somehow the delivery seems to be delayed. I don't know what's up with it. Fingers crossed that it is going to arrive soon. Unfortunately, the Winter Spirits isn't going so well. I took off the dust jacket because it's too pretty to be damaged by my negligent reading habits. The story that I jumped to after reading Natasha Pulley's story is the one by Katrina Ward named Jenkin. Now, I've always been interested in and fascinated by the synopses of Katrina Ward's books, but have never picked them up because they are typically written in present tense, and I can't stand present tense writing out of novels that are mostly experimental or do some kind of interesting thing with language, narrative structure, etc. And Katrina Ward's stories are all just good old yarns, and I don't get why people write these types of stories in present tense, because there's just this incongruency which isn't even semantically meaningful. In addition, I think that in English it always sounds just stupid. Like, she opens the door, she goes into the room, she sees a thing, it makes her feel a feeling. It just always sounds like that to me, which again is appropriate some of the times, depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. But with these good old yarns like spooky horror or thrillers, it just doesn't make sense to me. All that is to say, this is why this short story has been the first thing by Katrina Ward that I've read. But to be honest, it doesn't make me feel bad about having missed her previous novels. It was just a very basic story with the only spooky element in it being a sort of a very cringy manifestation of a psychological mechanism, psychological phenomenon, which is really a very, very basic thing. And it was a bit embarrassing to read, to be honest. Like, it gave me secondhand embarrassing on Katrina Ward's behalf. In addition, the story also leaned heavily into the direction of oh, how women have suffered in this unfair world. And yes, I know they have. This is really cringy at this point. The stories in the haunting season leaned very heavily in this direction as well. I hope the rest of the stories in this volume don't go the same way too. The story I picked on a whim after that is the one by Andrew Michael Hurley called The Old Play. His story in the haunting season was one of the best and most atmospheric ones in that volume as well. So I have high hopes for this one, and this one is set on New Year's Eve too. It's about a theater play that is only staged on New Year's Eve, and it's set in 1949, if I understand it correctly. So this is interesting, at least. As for the rest of my reading for this year, I had big plans. I had plans to cram in another book that I hoped might end up being one of my favorites of the year. But I was just too tired yesterday to start it, and by now it's really too late, and I don't want to rush reading it either. So I'm just going to make it a very slow, lazy, cozy reading night tonight. I saw last night that Gregory Ashe, one of my favorites, had very sneakily published a short collection of crime short stories that he originally published on his Patreon page. And they are now available for the public, sold everywhere where ebooks are sold. And I immediately downloaded the collection and have already read the first story, which was a bit frustrating, but the new character that is introduced in these stories is absolutely lovable, and I look forward to reading more from him. I think I'm going to wrap up this vlog now, even though we are only halfway through the 12 nights. But I already have so much material. The one thing that I still want to do in this vlog, though, is pick my first read for January.